Welcome to 28storms.com. I am Jason Moreland for your tropical cyclone update. This video will talk much about the latest tropical cyclone formation, that is Tropical Cyclone Atu, located in the South Pacific. We've been telling you about the potential for development for the past several days, and the Fiji Met Service has just classified the storm as Tropical Cyclone Atu within the past 2 hours or so. So let's get right on into it. Here is the latest visible imagery of the storm system, and thankfully we're getting this visible loop just before sunset over in this part of the world. And as you can see, we have a tightly wound up center of circulation located just east of the island nation of Vanuatu. And of course, that's this set of islands just to the west of the inner core of newly formed tropical cyclone Atu. This is the latest infrared image to give you a different perspective. And also here is an enhanced infrared that shows you some of the coldest cloud tops, and some of these deeper reds and maroon colors are an indication of where the strongest and heaviest rainfall and winds are occurring, and is paralleling the island nation of Vanuatu just to the east. Now here is the latest zoomed in visible imagery, and you may notice that, yes, it looks like a bit of an eye feature, but that seems to be a bit premature to be calling that much of an eye. The storm's overall structure still needs to improve a bit before we get to that type of development stage. But nevertheless, if you look at the satellite imagery, you notice that the inner circulation as a whole still has a slight westerly component to it. And that means the southern half of the island nation of Vanuatu are still going to want to pay attention for a couple reasons. First of all, the inner structure is already fairly close to these islands. And number two, if it continues to move in that general direction for at least another 12 to 24 hours, I should say, there's still a chance that the strongest winds can still come right over these islands. Now, just to give you some perspective, this is the island of Port Vila, and then toward the south we still have the islands of Eromango and also Tana, and then there's a smaller island just to the south. So if this general motion continues much longer, these islands are going to be under the gun for cyclone conditions. This is the official forecast from the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center. If you look closely, the official forecast track keeps the center of circulation just barely to the east of Port Vila. And I should also point out that some of the smaller islands to the south aren't on this map, so you need to keep that in mind when you're looking at this. Nevertheless, the other island nations of New Caledonia and Fiji are not expected to witness direct impacts from this particular storm system. If anything, you may see an increase in wave heights, but that's about it, because it will recurve to the southeast as this forecast shows. I think the biggest question mark in regards to the validity of this forecast is what will happen over the next 24 hours. Will it deviate ever so slightly to the west? And even if it does, that won't be so much of a bust, because if you look at the overall cone right here, this is the average margin of error. So it wouldn't be unheard of if the center just tracked a few miles off to the west, which would put these southernmost islands under the direct strongest winds. So I would not be at all surprised. Now keep in mind, this is not an official source. Please stick with your local weather and government sources for the most updated information if you live on these islands. But nevertheless, I would not be surprised if this track shifts ever so slightly. So I would be ready for cyclone conditions that could begin as early as within the next 12 hours or so. And it's not going to move all that fast. I mean, just look at the general motion on this forecast. It's not going to move all that much over the next day or so. Now, just to give you a perspective as to why we even have a storm in the first place, this is the latest upper level air analysis from the SIMS website. As you can see, there's a pretty strong area of upper level ridging located directly to the west of the storm. So that's really aiding in the poleward outflow channel quite a bit. If anything, it's not centered directly over the storm just yet, and therefore we're still getting some southerly shear, as I alluded to when we looked at the water vapor image. But overall, it's still a pretty decent environment for at least some modest strengthening. We're no longer expecting this storm to become a severe cyclone or anything of the sort, but it could very well ramp up to about 85 knots, as the Joint Typhoon Warning Center has in their latest forecast. Also, here's a look at the latest shear tendency map, and you can also see that fairly well. Here's the located center of the upper level ridge, and yes, we still have some southerly shear to the south. But as the storm continues to move south, so will the shear a little bit, so that's not expected to be much of a problem. Of course, sea surface temperatures in this part of the world are not an issue either, because they're more than warm enough. Again, the storm is in this general vicinity, and sea surface temperatures are well above 26 degrees Celsius. Now, as it begins to move further south below 25 degrees south, it will begin to encounter cooler water temperatures as it becomes absorbed by a non-tropical trough. Now, this is the latest steering layer analysis from the SIMS website, and currently the steering currents really aren't all that strong. That's the reason why we're not expecting much more than just the southerly or south-southwest drift over the next day or so. We still have a pretty good amount of mid-level ridging over the southern Coral Sea and eastern Australia, and that's going to prevent the storm from moving too much in this general direction. And that's also the reason why we're not expecting New Caledonia to be directly impacted by the inner core of the storm. But if we look at some of the model guidance, they're really showing a mid to upper level trough really beginning to take part of this mid-level ridging away over here, and it's going to create a weakness further to the south where the storm is going to be able to recurve. We can see this fairly well on the latest ECMWF model run. This is 0 hours, but as we go into 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, you really begin to see this trough pop up fairly quickly. And that's going to totally take down the southeast portion of this ridge that's now only confined to central Australia by 72 hours. And that's going to really create that weakness for the storm to begin to really increase its forward speed as it continues off to the southeast. And we can see that fairly well. This is 96 hours, 120 hours. It's forecast to bypass New Zealand just to the north and east. And even if it were to come in further south than this is forecast, it's going to be much more of a non-tropical system by then. So certainly areas around New Zealand don't have to worry about a tropical cyclone impact, which is what they're accustomed to. They're really not going to see a direct tropical cyclone landfall anytime soon, because that would be quite out of the ordinary if that happened, and we don't foresee anything different going on in this case. By 144 hours, it's passing safely to the east, and that's about all there is to it. Now, this is the most recent 0Z version of the GFS, so this just came out within the past hour, and I must say it is fairly interesting. If we look at the 0 hour starting point, we see the center of circulation just to the east of the islands, if not encompassing part of the islands. And as we go into 12 hours, just look how close this storm is to some of these island areas. By 18 and 24 hours, it still has a slight west of due south trajectory. So once again, the islands are not out of the margin of error by far. The models are still showing a potential threat. By 36 hours, we're still talking about the storm system in the same general area with not a whole lot of movement. And by 48 and 60 hours, it's finally moving off to the east. And by 60 hours, it's almost directly east of New Caledonia, and it's intensifying fairly rapidly. It's down to at least 984 millibars is what I think I see on this latest map, although it's somewhat difficult to see. That's a pretty good surface pressure for a model solution, because a lot of times they can't totally resolve tropical cyclones, especially when they're intense. And as you can see, this is a fairly strong storm throughout the period. This is 96 hours. And then by 120 hours, day 5, it's passing to the east of New Zealand as it begins to become extratropical. This is the latest no-gaps forecast, and it's not as accurate as the ECMWF and GFS, but nevertheless, it's worth looking at. And by 18 hours, it basically has the center directly over southern Vanuatu. Much the same for 24 hours. So once again, there's some discrepancies between the model solutions. Some are slightly further west than the official forecast track, and that's something we have to consider. By 48 hours, it's beginning to move on toward the south. By 60 hours, much like the GFS, it's just east of New Caledonia, and it's rapidly intensifying thereafter and marching off to the north and eventually east of New Zealand. So that is your summary of what is going on with Tropical Cyclone Atu. We wish you the best if you live along the southern half of the island nation of Vanuatu. Please listen to your local authorities or weather service for the most recent and most important information that could potentially save your life, or at least help you protect your home a little bit better than you ordinarily would if you didn't know that the storm was coming. Again, this is not an official source of information. This is simply some supplementary info to go along with the official products. So once again, thank you for checking out 28storms.com. For more tropical cyclone tracking information, please go to 28storms.com/cyclone or subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/28cyclones. And if you think someone else is interested in what we do here, please let them know as well. So thanks again for coming, and check back soon for more updates.